The cathedral had been forgotten by time itself, swallowed by centuries of shadow and silence, a monument to prayers that no longer echoed and faith that had withered like autumn leaves. Its towering spires pierced the night sky like accusing fingers, reaching toward a heaven that had long since turned its face away. Within those ancient stone walls, where once hymns had risen and incense had perfumed the air, now only the scent of decay lingered, damp stone, rotting wood, and something else, something older and more primal that spoke of blood and eternal hunger. Moonlight filtered through shattered stained glass windows, casting fractured patterns of crimson, sapphire, and gold across the stone floor. The images depicted in those windows, saints and angels, martyrs and miracles, had been corrupted by time and neglect, their faces weathered into grotesque masks, their halos cracked in bleeding-colored light. It was through this kaleidoscope of broken holiness that the light fell upon her, the creature who had claimed this abandoned sanctuary as her own dark throne. She stood at the altar, a vision of terrible beauty that defied mortal comprehension, a bride dressed for a wedding that would never come, a celebration of union with death itself. Her gown flowed around her like liquid shadow, black silk that absorbed the light and gave nothing back, trimmed with deep crimson lace that seemed to pulse with its own dark life. The fabric clung to her figure in ways that were both enticing and threatening, revealing the curves and contours of a body that had been frozen in time at the peak of its allure, preserved in eternal youth by the curse that ran through her veins instead of blood. Her skin was porcelain perfection, so pale it seemed to glow with an inner luminescence, smooth and flawless as carved marble. It had not felt the warmth of sunlight in over 3 centuries, had not flushed with the heat of a mortal blush or the fever of human passion since the night she had been transformed. Now it was cold to the touch, beautiful in the way that ice sculptures are beautiful, stunning, perfect, and utterly lifeless beneath the surface. But it was her eyes that truly captured the essence of what she had become. They burned with an unholy crimson light, glowing coals set in that pale face, capable of mesmerizing prey or striking terror into the hearts of those foolish enough to meet her gaze. Those eyes had watched empires rise and fall, had seen countless mortal lives flicker and fade like mayflies dancing in summer twilight. They held the weight of centuries, the accumulated wisdom and weariness of an existence that stretched far beyond the natural span of human life, and within their depths lurked something ancient and hungry, something that had long ago forgotten what it meant to be human. Upon her head rested a crown of tarnished silver, its intricate Gothic designs depicting thorns and roses intertwined, a mockery of both suffering and beauty. It had been a wedding gift, she remembered dimly, though the face of the one who had given it to her had long since faded from memory like a photograph left too long in the sun. How many had there been since then? How many lovers, how many victims, how many mortals who had looked upon her with desire or terror or that intoxicating mixture of both? The veil that should have covered her face hung in tatters, torn deliberately in an ancient gesture of rejection and rage. It drifted around her shoulders like morning mist, catching the candlelight and transforming into ghostly wisps that seemed to move with a will of their own. She had torn it herself on her wedding night, not the mortal wedding she had been prepared for, but the dark ceremony that had followed, the unholy matrimony that had bound her to darkness and hunger for all eternity. And then there were the wings. They emerged from her back in a magnificent and terrible display, vast pinions of shadow and membrane that stretched upward and outward, nearly spanning the width of the cathedral's nave. They were neither fully bat-like nor fully bird-like, but something in between, something that nature had never intended, a perversion of the divine gift of flight. The membrane was dark as midnight, shot through with veins that pulsed with that same crimson light that burned in her eyes, and when they moved, they created currents of cold air that set the candles flickering and made the shadows dance like living things. The candles themselves were arranged in careful patterns around the altar and throughout the cathedral, hundreds of them, perhaps thousands, their flames steady and unwavering in the still air. She had placed them herself, a ritual she performed every night, a meditation on the light she could never again walk in. They created islands of illumination in the vast darkness, and between them the shadows pooled deep and black, hiding the detritus of ages, fallen timbers, crumbling masonry, the bones of small animals and the occasional larger skeleton that no one came to claim or mourn. This was her domain, her kingdom of darkness and solitude. She was Vladimira, though that name too was just one of many she had worn over the centuries like discarded gowns. She had been called goddess, demon, monster, and angel. She had been worshipped and hunted, desired and feared. She had ruled over courts of the undead and walked alone through empty centuries. She had known power and pleasure, had tasted the sweetest blood and the most exquisite terror, and all of it had become ash in her mouth, meaningless repetition in an existence that stretched on without purpose or end. Tonight, like every night for the past 300 years, she stood at this altar and waited. For what, she could no longer say. Perhaps for release, though she had long ago lost the ability to seek true death. Perhaps for meaning, though she had forgotten what that word truly signified. Perhaps for nothing at all, simply going through the motions of a ritual that had become as automatic as breathing once was, before her lungs had stilled and her heart had ceased its beating. She did not expect the footsteps. The sound came from the cathedral's entrance, echoing through the vast empty space with a clarity that made her ancient senses suddenly sharp and alert. Footsteps, human footsteps, measured and deliberate, neither running in panic nor creeping in fear, but walking with purpose and determination. How long had it been since anyone had dared to enter this place? Decades? Longer? The local villagers told stories about the cursed cathedral, warned their children to stay away, crossed themselves and spat to ward off evil when they passed on the distant road. Vladimira turned slowly, her movements fluid and predatory, her wings spreading slightly in an instinctive display of dominance and threat. Her crimson eyes focused on the figure that emerged from the shadows of the entrance, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something akin to surprise. It was a man. No, a young man, perhaps in his late 20s, though with mortals it was always difficult to tell with certainty. He wore simple traveling clothes, dusty from the road, a long coat that had seen better days, and boots that spoke of many miles walked. His hair was dark and slightly unkempt, falling across a face that was neither remarkably handsome nor plain, but possessed of a certain intensity, a quality of presence that made him more than the sum of his ordinary features. But it was his eyes that held her attention. They were gray, the color of storm clouds or steel, and they regarded her without flinching, without the glazed look of mesmerization or the wide-eyed terror she had come to expect from mortals who beheld her true form. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and she felt something she had not experienced in centuries. The sensation of being seen not as a monster or a goddess or a creature of nightmare, but as something else, something she could not quite name. "You should not be here," she said, and her voice filled the cathedral like the tolling of a great bell, resonant and commanding, laced with power that could compel obedience or inspire despair. "This is not a place for the living." The man continued walking toward her, his footsteps steady on the stone floor, weaving between the candles without disturbing their flames. "Neither is it a place for the dead," he replied, and his voice was quiet but clear, carrying easily through the vast space. "Yet here we both stand, in this place between, this liminal space where neither life nor death holds full dominion." She felt her lips curl into what might have been a smile, though it held no warmth, only the promise of danger. Bold words from one so fragile. "Do you know what I am, little mortal? Do you understand the peril you have placed yourself in by coming here?" "I know that you are called Vladimira," he said, still approaching, now close enough that she could see the individual threads of his coat, the faint stubble on his jaw, the steady pulse at his throat that sent blood coursing through his veins in a rhythm that called to her hunger like a siren song. "I know that you were made what you are on the night of your wedding, 3 centuries past. I know that you have stood in this cathedral every night since, a bride waiting for a groom who will never come, performing a ritual of grief and rage that has become its own kind of prison." The smile faded from her face, replaced by something colder and more dangerous. "You speak as though you know me, but you know nothing. I am beyond your comprehension, beyond your mortal understanding of pain or purpose. I am eternal, immortal, and you are nothing but a moment, a flickering candle flame that I could extinguish with a thought." "Then why haven't you?" he asked, and now he stood directly before her at the foot of the altar steps, looking up at her with those steady gray eyes. "Why do you hesitate? Why do you listen to my words instead of tearing out my throat and drinking until my heart stops beating? Is it because, despite everything you tell yourself, despite centuries of convincing yourself that you are a monster and nothing more, some part of you, some small, stubborn human part, is curious? Is lonely? Is desperate for connection to something beyond the endless cycle of hunt and feed in empty nights?" She moved faster than mortal eyes could follow, one moment standing at the altar and the next directly before him, her hand wrapped around his throat, claws that could rend steel pressing lightly against his vulnerable skin. She could feel his pulse beneath her fingers, rapid but not panicked, could smell the warmth of his blood, could see the reflection of her burning eyes in his own. "I could kill you before you drew another breath," she whispered, her face inches from his. "I could make it painful or ecstatic or both. I could drain you dry and leave you a withered husk on this cold stone floor, and no one would ever know, no one would ever mourn, no one would even remember that you existed." "You could," he agreed, his voice slightly strained by the pressure on his throat but still steady, still calm. "But you won't." "And why?" she hissed, her fangs fully extended now, sharp and white and deadly. "Would I show mercy to one so foolish as to seek out a monster in her den?" "Because you're tired," he said simply. "Tired of the hunger that never satisfies. Tired of the power that has become its own burden. Tired of the loneliness that stretches on without end. Tired of being what you are and not being able to remember who you were." Her grip tightened involuntarily and she saw him wince, but still he did not look away, did not beg or plead or try to bargain for his life. "What could you possibly know about what I feel? You who have lived barely a quarter of a century, who have not yet felt the weight of even a single mortal lifetime." "I know what it is to be alone," he said quietly. "I know what it is to wear a mask so long that you forget what your true face looks like. I know what it is to lose yourself in a role you were forced to play until the role becomes the only thing you are. I know what it is to look at the sunrise and feel nothing but emptiness, to go through the motions of existence without truly living." She released him abruptly, stepping back as though his words had burned her. "You know nothing," she repeated, but there was less certainty in her voice now, less conviction. "You are mortal, alive, free in ways I can never be again. You have not lost what I have lost. Haven't I?" He rubbed his throat absently, but his eyes never left her face. "What is life without meaning? What is freedom when you cannot find purpose? What is existence when every day is merely a repetition of the one before, when nothing truly matters and nothing truly changes?" "At least you have a choice," she said, and for the first time, there was something in her voice that was not power or menace or cold command, but something rawer, something that might have been pain. "At least your existence has an end, a natural conclusion. You can change, grow, die, be reborn. The cycle continues for you. For me there is only this, forever, unchanging, eternal. Is that what you think?" He took a step toward her, and she found herself retreating, wings rustling in agitation. "That mortality is a gift because it ends? That the brevity of human life gives it meaning? Perhaps. But eternity is only a prison if you choose to make it one. Immortality is only empty if you fill it with nothing." "Beautiful philosophy," she said, her voice dripping with scorn, though beneath it something else stirred, something uncomfortable and unfamiliar. "Spoken like someone who has never faced true eternity, never felt the weight of centuries pressing down until you can barely remember why you continue to exist. Then tell me," he said, his voice gentle now, almost tender, "tell me why you do continue. Why you stand here night after night, lighting your candles, wearing your wedding gown, playing the role of the tragic bride. If existence is so unbearable, if immortality is such a curse, why not seek the true death you claim to desire?" She turned away from him, her wings folding slightly, a gesture that might have been defensive or simply weary. "You think I have not tried? You think I have not stood in the path of the rising sun, felt the first burning rays touch my skin? You think I have not sought out hunters, monster slayers, those who dedicate their lives to destroying creatures like me? You think I have not begged for release, for ending, for peace? And yet here you stand." "I am a coward," she said flatly. "When the moment comes, when the final darkness beckons, something in me refuses, clings to this mockery of life, fears the unknown that lies beyond even more than it fears the emptiness of continuing. I am a prisoner of my own weakness, my own inability to let go. Or perhaps," he said softly, and she heard his footsteps approaching from behind, felt him climb the altar steps until he stood beside her. "Perhaps you continue because some part of you still hopes." She laughed, and it was a bitter sound, empty of joy. "Hope? Hope for what? That some miracle will restore what was taken from me? That I will wake one night and find myself human again, mortal again, alive in the way I once was? That is not hope, that is delusion. Hope that your existence might yet find meaning," he said. "Hope that eternity might hold something worth experiencing. Hope that you are not merely a monster, but something more complex, something capable of change and growth even within the constraints of your cursed state. She finally turned to look at him, and in the candlelight she could see his face more clearly, the lines of kindness around his eyes, the gentle set of his mouth, the intelligence and understanding that radiated from him like warmth from a fire. "Why are you here?" she asked, and this time there was no threat in the question, only genuine curiosity. "Why seek me out? Why speak these words to me? What could you possibly hope to gain?" He smiled, and it transformed his face, made him truly handsome in that moment. "Perhaps I am a fool as you suggested. Perhaps I am drawn to lost causes and impossible redemptions. Or perhaps I simply could not bear the thought of you standing here alone for another 300 years, convinced that you are nothing but a monster, that your existence has no value beyond the hunger and the hunt. And what would you have me be instead?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What possible alternative is there for something like me?" "I would have you be yourself," he said simply. "Not the vampire, not the monster, not the tragic bride or the lonely immortal, but Vladimira, whatever and whoever that means. I would have you discover who you are when you stop performing the role you believe you must play." She stared at him for a long moment, her crimson eyes searching his gray ones, looking for deception or manipulation or hidden agenda, but finding only sincerity in something else, something that looked almost like hope, hope for her reflected in a mortal's eyes. "You are either the bravest man I have ever met," she said finally, "or the most foolish. Perhaps both." "Perhaps," he agreed. "But here is what I know. You have stood in this cathedral for 3 centuries, alone with your pain and your hunger, convinced that isolation is all you deserve, that connection is impossible for something like you. You have worn your grief like a wedding dress and your rage like a crown, and you have called it strength. But true strength is not in endurance without purpose. It is in the courage to be vulnerable, to risk hope even when hope seems impossible, to reach out for connection even when every instinct tells you that you are too monstrous to be worthy of it." Her hands trembled slightly, a minute gesture that she could not quite control. "And if you are wrong? If there is nothing beneath this monster but more monstrosity? If the human I once was is truly dead, not merely sleeping? Then at least you will know," he said. "At least you will have tried. At least you will not spend another 3 centuries wondering what might have been if only you had been brave enough to find out." The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the soft hiss and flicker of the countless candles. Vladimira felt something shifting inside her, some structure that had been rigid for centuries beginning to crack and crumble. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, this sensation of walls coming down, of defenses being breached not by force but by gentle, persistent truth. "What is your name?" she asked finally, her voice so quiet he had to lean closer to hear it. "Marcus," he said. "My name is Marcus." "Marcus?" she repeated, tasting the name, feeling the shape of it on her tongue. "Why? Why do you care what becomes of me? What am I to you that you would risk your life to speak these words?" He hesitated for the first time, and she saw something vulnerable flash across his face before he spoke. "Because I was like you once. Not a vampire, not immortal, but lost in my own darkness, convinced that I was beyond redemption, that I deserved nothing but the emptiness I felt. And someone reached out to me, someone refused to let me disappear into that darkness, and they gave me a gift. Not salvation, not rescue, but simply the reminder that I was human, that I mattered, that my existence had value beyond my worst actions and my deepest failures." "And you thought to pay that gift forward?" she asked. "To seek out monsters in the night and remind them of their humanity?" "I thought to seek out those who are suffering," he corrected gently, "regardless of what form that suffering takes. You are suffering, Vladimira. You have been suffering for 300 years. And whether you are monster or maiden, whether you deserve compassion or condemnation, the fact remains that you are a being capable of pain, and I cannot witness that pain without trying to ease it, even if only by speaking words that might offer a different perspective." Tears formed in her eyes, actual tears, something she had not experienced since the night of her transformation. They were tinged pink with the blood that flowed through her instead of water, and they spilled down her pale cheeks like jewels. "You foolish, beautiful, impossible man," she whispered. "You do not know what you have done." "What have I done?" he asked, reaching out slowly, giving her time to pull away, but she did not move as his hand came to rest gently on her cheek, his thumb brushing away one of those blood-red tears. You have reminded me, she said, her voice breaking on the words, of what it feels like to be seen. To be acknowledged as something more than a predator or a victim, more than a cautionary tale or a tragic figure. You have reminded me that I can still feel, can still hurt, can still hope, and I do not know whether to thank you or curse you for it, because feeling again after so long numb is agony. I know, he said softly. Believe me, I know. The numbness is a mercy in its own way. It protects us from the full weight of our pain. But it also cuts us off from everything else, from joy and connection and possibility. To truly live, even in the half-life of your existence, requires that we feel, all of it, the pain and the hope together. She closed her eyes, leaning into his touch for just a moment, savoring the warmth of living flesh against her cold skin, the gentleness of the gesture, the acceptance it implied. I have forgotten how to be anything but this, she said. I have worn this role for so long that I do not know if there is anything beneath it. Then let us find out together, Marcus said. Not tonight, not with a single conversation that somehow fixes 3 centuries of pain and isolation. But slowly, over time, if you are willing. Let me visit you here, let me talk with you, share stories with you, remind you of the world beyond these walls and the possibilities that still exist even in darkness. And what would you ask in return? She asked, opening her eyes to look at him with suspicion born of long experience. What price for your companionship, your wisdom, your hope? No price, he said. No bargain, no deal, no exchange of services. Simply, let me matter to you. Let me be real to you, not just prey or food or a means to an end, but a person, a friend perhaps, someone whose existence has value beyond what I can provide. That is all I ask, to be seen by you as you wish to be seen by me. Something in her chest, where her heart had once beaten, seemed to clench and release, a phantom pain from a phantom organ, a memory of what it felt like to be moved by another's words. You are very strange, Marcus, she said, but there was no mockery in it, only a kind of wondering curiosity. I have been told that before, he admitted with a slight smile. But then you are quite strange yourself, Vladimira. Perhaps that is why I thought we might understand each other. She laughed, and this time it was not bitter or empty, but held the faintest note of genuine amusement. 2 strange beings meeting in an abandoned cathedral at midnight. It sounds like the beginning of a very peculiar story. All the best stories are peculiar, Marcus said. The predictable ones are hardly worth telling. They stood together at the altar as the candles continued to burn around them, mortal and immortal, human and vampire, 2 beings who by all logic should have been predator and prey but who had somehow, through words and will and willingness to see each other truly, become something else. Not quite friends yet perhaps, but not enemies either. Something new, something undefined, something with the potential to grow into forms neither of them could yet imagine. I do not know if I can be what you seem to think I can be, Vladimira said finally. I do not know if the human part of me is strong enough to overcome the monster. It is not about overcoming, Marcus said. It is not about destroying one part of yourself to free another. It is about integration, about allowing all the parts of who you are, human and vampire, innocent and predator, bride and hunter, to coexist, to inform each other, to create something complex and whole rather than fragmented and at war with itself. That sounds impossibly difficult, she said. It is, he agreed. I would not lie to you and claim otherwise. But impossible and difficult are not the same thing. Difficult simply means it will take time, patience, effort, and the willingness to fail and try again. Impossible means it cannot be done at all. And I do not believe that you are impossible, Vladimira. I believe you are difficult, complicated, challenging, but not impossible. She studied his face for a long moment, memorizing the features, the expression, the quiet confidence and gentle insistence that radiated from him. Finally she nodded slowly. Very well, Marcus. Come to me tomorrow night and the night after, and we shall see if your words hold truth or are merely pretty lies told in the darkness. We shall see if I am capable of being something other than this. I will come, he promised. Every night, for as long as you will have me, until you either find what you are seeking or decide that the seeking itself is pointless. I will come, and I will remind you that you are not alone, that your existence matters, that you are more than the sum of your hungers and your hurts. You may come to regret that promise, she warned. I am not easy company. I am moody and dangerous and capable of cruelty when the hunger grows strong. I do not expect you to be easy, Marcus said. I expect you to be yourself, with all the complexity and contradiction that entails. And I am willing to accept that, to work with it, to be present for it, not because I think I can fix you or save you, but because I believe you are worth the effort of truly knowing. Those words, those simple, profound words, broke something in her that had been frozen for 3 centuries. The tears came more freely now, blood-red and shimmering in the candlelight, and she did not try to stop them or hide them or pretend that she was unaffected. She let herself feel, let herself hurt, let herself hope, and it was terrible and wonderful and terrifying all at once. Marcus did not try to embrace her or comfort her with physical touch beyond that gentle hand on her cheek. He simply stood with her, present and patient, letting her experience the emotions without trying to fix or diminish them. And in that space, in that quiet acceptance, something new began to grow. Not redemption, not yet, perhaps not ever in any complete sense, but at least the possibility of change, the seed of hope planted in soil that had been barren for far too long. When the tears finally subsided, Vladimira straightened, her wings rustling as she regained some measure of her composure. You should go, she said quietly. Dawn is still hours away, but you should not linger here too long. This place is not safe even with my protection. Will you be all right? He asked, concerned. She almost laughed at that, a vampire being asked if she would be all right by the mortal who had just emotionally devastated her. I have been not all right for 300 years, she said. One more night will not make much difference. But yes, Marcus, I will endure. I always do. That is both my curse and my gift. He nodded slowly, then turned to go, his footsteps echoing through the vast cathedral as he made his way back toward the entrance. But at the doorway, he paused and looked back at her, a slender dark figure standing at the altar surrounded by countless flickering candles, her wings partially spread, her torn veil drifting in the cold air, her crimson eyes burning bright in the darkness. Vladimira, he called, his voice carrying clearly through the space between them. Yes. Thank you for letting me see you. Not the monster or the legend or the tragic figure, but you, the being beneath all the roles and defenses. It was an honor. And then he was gone, disappearing into the night, leaving her alone once more in her cathedral of candles and shadows. But it was a different kind of alone now, not the crushing isolation she had known before, but a solitude that held within it the promise of return, the knowledge that someone out there in the mortal world carried the memory of her, thought of her not with fear or desire but with understanding and regard. Vladimira sank down onto the altar steps, her gown pooling around her, her wings folding against her back. She sat there in silence for a long time, feeling the unfamiliar sensations that Marcus's words had awakened in her. Not just pain and hope, but curiosity, anticipation, even a kind of excitement about what the next night might bring. For 300 years, she had lived the same night over and over, an endless repetition of emptiness and hunger. But now, for the first time since her transformation, she had something to look forward to, something to anticipate beyond the mere continuation of existence. She had a visitor coming, a strange mortal man who saw her as something more than a monster, who challenged her assumptions about herself, who offered not salvation but simply companionship on the long dark road ahead. It was a small thing, perhaps, in the grand scope of eternity. One mortal life was nothing to an immortal being, a few decades at most, a brief flicker against the backdrop of her endless existence. But in that moment, sitting on those cold stone steps with the memory of his warm hand on her cheek, it felt like everything. It felt like a lifeline thrown into drowning waters, like a candle lit against encroaching darkness, like the first crack in a dam that had held back too much pressure for too long. She did not know what would come of this strange encounter, this meeting of mortal and immortal in an abandoned cathedral at midnight. She did not know if Marcus's hope was justified or naive, if she was truly capable of the change he seemed to believe possible. She did not know if the human part of her could ever be reconciled with the monster she had become, if the bride could ever lay down her grief and rage, if the immortal could ever find meaning in eternity. But for the first time in 300 years she wanted to find out. As dawn approached and the candles began to gutter and die one by one, Vladimira remained on the altar steps, not moving to take shelter in the deeper darkness of the cathedral's crypt as she usually did. Instead, she watched the slow progression of the night toward morning, watched the quality of darkness begin to shift from black to deep blue to the faintest hint of gray at the edges. She would have to retreat soon. The sun was death to her kind, true death, final and irrevocable. But she allowed herself to linger just a moment longer, to watch the approach of something she could never again experience directly, to remember what it had been like to greet the dawn without fear, to feel sunlight on her skin and see the world painted in morning colors. And as she finally rose and moved toward the safety of the crypt, as the last candles flickered and died and the first rays of sun began to pierce the broken stained glass, she felt something she had not felt in 3 centuries. She felt grateful to have survived the night. Not because she feared true death, but because survival meant she would see another sunset, another night, another possibility of Marcus's return and the strange, frightening, wonderful thing that was beginning to grow between them. In the darkness of the crypt, lying in the stone coffin that had been her bed for longer than most mortal families could trace their lineage, Vladimira closed her eyes and allowed herself to sleep. And for the first time in memory, her dreams were not of blood and loss and endless repetition, but of words spoken in kindness, of gray eyes that saw her truly, of a mortal man who had the courage to reach out to a monster and call her by her name. 3 weeks later. The cathedral had changed, though the alterations were subtle enough that a casual observer might not have noticed. The candles were arranged differently now, less like a memorial or a shrine and more like simple illumination, warm and welcoming rather than austere and ritualistic. Some of the debris had been cleared away, the fallen timbers and crumbling masonry pushed to the sides, creating more open space. Fresh flowers, night-blooming jasmine and moonflowers, appeared in scattered vases, their sweet scent mixing with the smell of stone and wax. But the greatest change was not in the physical space but in its inhabitant. Vladimira still wore her wedding gown, still bore her crown of thorns and roses, still possessed the terrible beauty of her vampiric nature. But there was something different in the way she carried herself, in the expression of her face, in the light that burned in her crimson eyes. The crushing weight of isolation had lifted, replaced by something lighter, something that might have been cautious optimism. Marcus had kept his promise. Every night for 3 weeks he had come to the cathedral, had sat with her on the altar steps or walked with her through the vast empty space, had talked with her about philosophy and history, about the world beyond the cathedral walls, about the small details of mortal life that she had forgotten or never known. He brought her books and read passages aloud, brought her news of the village and the wider world, brought her stories and laughter and perspective. And slowly, carefully, like a flower unfurling its petals toward the sun, Vladimira had begun to open. She told him stories of her mortal life, memories she had thought lost forever suddenly surfacing with surprising clarity. She told him of her transformation, of the vampire lord who had chosen her as his bride and cursed her with immortality when she refused him. She told him of the centuries that followed, of the things she had done, the people she had killed, the darkness she had embraced because she could see no other path. Marcus listened to all of it without judgment or horror, accepting her confessions with the same quiet compassion he had shown from the beginning. He did not excuse her actions or pretend that the harm she had caused did not matter, but neither did he define her solely by her worst moments. He held space for the complexity of her existence, for the ways that victim and victimizer could exist in the same being, for the possibility that acknowledging past harm was the first step toward choosing a different future. "I have been thinking," Vladimira said one night as they sat together, her wings folded loosely around them both, creating a kind of private space within the larger cathedral, "about what you said that first night. About integration, about allowing all parts of myself to coexist rather than trying to destroy the monster to free the human." "And?" Marcus prompted gently, his shoulder warm against hers even through the layers of fabric. "And I think perhaps you were right, but I do not think I understood what it truly meant. I thought integration meant finding some balance between the hunger and the humanity, some middle ground where I could be both vampire and person without the two parts warring constantly. But it is more than that, is it not?" "Tell me what you think it is," he said, his gray eyes reflecting the candlelight. She was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "It is about accepting that I am not two separate things awkwardly stitched together, but one complete being whose nature encompasses both elements. I am not human despite being a vampire, nor am I a vampire who occasionally remembers her humanity. I am Vladimira, and Vladimira is all of it. The memories of mortality, the reality of immortality, the capacity for both tenderness and cruelty, the longing for connection and the fear of vulnerability. All of it is me, and none of it can be separated from the rest without destroying who I am." Marcus smiled, and there was pride in it and warmth. Yes, he said simply. That is exactly it. You are not a problem to be solved or a puzzle to be fixed. You are a being with a complex nature, and accepting that complexity, embracing it rather than fighting it, is the key to finding peace with your existence. Peace, she repeated, testing the word. I am not certain I will ever know true peace. The hunger is still there, Marcus. Every night, every moment, I feel it gnawing at me. I still need blood to survive, still need to hunt, to kill. That has not changed. No, he agreed. That has not changed. And I would never suggest that you simply ignore your nature or try to be something you are not. But there is a difference between feeding and cruelty, between taking what you need to survive and causing unnecessary suffering. You have told me that you used to hunt indiscriminately, that you took pleasure in the terror and pain you caused. Is that still true? She shook her head slowly. No. I have not hunted in the old way since you began visiting. I have fed, I must feed, but I have tried to be cleaner about it. Quick, efficient, choosing those who would not be missed or who perhaps deserve judgment for their own cruelties. It is still killing, still predation, but it feels different. Less like an expression of rage and more like simple necessity. That is not nothing, Marcus said. That is a significant change, a choice to minimize harm even within the constraints of your nature. It does not erase the past, but it shapes the future. Every night you make that choice, you are choosing to be something other than the monster you convinced yourself you had to be. It is exhausting, she admitted. Fighting the hunger, maintaining control, constantly making conscious choices about something that used to be thoughtless instinct. It takes effort, awareness, will. I understand now why I let myself become what I was. It was so much easier to simply surrender to the darkness, to give in fully to the predator and stop trying to retain any humanity. Anything worth doing is difficult, Marcus said. And you are strong enough to bear that difficulty. You have borne 3 centuries of isolation and despair. Surely you can bear the challenge of choosing who you want to be. She laughed softly, leaning her head against his shoulder in a gesture of affection that would have been unthinkable 3 weeks ago. You make it sound so simple. It is simple, he said. Not easy, but simple. Simple can still be the hardest thing in the world. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the candles flickering around them, the shadows dancing on the ancient walls. Vladimira felt something she was starting to recognize as contentment. Not happiness, perhaps not yet, but a kind of peace with the present moment, an acceptance of where and who she was without the constant gnawing dissatisfaction that had characterized her existence for so long. Marcus, she said finally, her voice soft. What happens when you grow old? When your mortal life reaches its natural end? What happens to this, to us, when you are gone? She felt him tense slightly, felt the shift in his breathing that suggested he had been dreading this question. I do not know, he admitted. I have thought about it, of course. I would be lying if I said I had not. But I do not have a good answer for you. I could turn you, she said quietly. I could make you like me, give you immortality, ensure that we could continue this for centuries rather than mere decades. Would you want that? Would you choose that if I offered it? The silence that followed was heavy, weighted with implications and possibilities. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice thoughtful and careful. If you had asked me that question 3 weeks ago before I met you, I might have said yes. Immortality, eternal life, the chance to learn and experience across centuries. It sounds appealing. But now, knowing what I know about what it costs, about the weight of eternity and the ways it changes you, I'm not certain. And that uncertainty is itself an answer, is it not? If I am not certain I want it, then I should not accept it. That is wise, she said, though there was sadness in her voice. Wiser than I was when I was given no choice, when immortality was forced upon me against my will. But it means that this, whatever this is between us, has an expiration date. It means that I will watch you age and weaken and die, as I have watched countless mortals before you, and I will be left alone again. Perhaps, Marcus said. Or perhaps by the time that happens, decades from now if I am fortunate, you will have built other connections, other relationships, other reasons to continue that do not depend solely on my presence. Perhaps what we are building here is not meant to be forever, but rather to be a bridge. Something that carries you from isolation to connection, from despair to possibility, from the conviction that you are only a monster to the understanding that you are much more. A bridge, she repeated. And when you are gone, I will be on the other side in a different place than where I started. That is my hope, he said. That is why I am here, why I sought you out, why I continue to come night after night even though I know that mortal time is precious and limited. Because I believe that helping you cross that bridge, helping you find your way to a better existence, is worth the investment of my limited years. She lifted her head to look at him, her crimson eyes searching his face in the candlelight. You are the strangest man I have ever met, she said, echoing her words from that first night. And I think perhaps you are also the kindest, though you would probably deny it. I am just a man, Marcus said with a slight smile. Flawed and mortal and trying to do what feels right in the moment. I do not claim to have all the answers or to be some paragon of virtue. I simply could not live with myself if I had known about your suffering and done nothing to address it. Most people would say that a vampire's suffering does not matter, Vladimira pointed out. That monsters do not deserve compassion or consideration. Most people are wrong about a great many things, Marcus replied. Suffering is suffering regardless of who or what experiences it. Denying that is how we excuse all manner of cruelty and indifference. You are a being capable of feeling pain, which means you are a being deserving of compassion. It really is that simple. Vladimira felt tears prick at her eyes again, that now familiar sensation that had become almost commonplace in the weeks since Marcus had entered her life. I do not deserve you, she said quietly. Deserving has nothing to do with it, Marcus said. This is not about merit or worthiness or earning care through good behavior. This is about two beings who found each other in the darkness and decided that connection was worth the risk and effort it requires. There is no deserving, there is only choosing again and again to show up and be present and try. She nodded, unable to speak past the emotion that clogged her throat. She had not known, 3 weeks ago, that it was possible to feel this much, to experience this intensity of connection and care. She had spent centuries convincing herself that such things were lost to her forever, that isolation was her inevitable fate. But Marcus had proven her wrong, had shown her that even an immortal monster could find companionship, understanding, acceptance. It would not last forever, nothing did except her own cursed existence. Marcus would age and die and she would grieve, and that grief would be its own kind of terrible. But she was beginning to understand that the temporary nature of the connection did not diminish its value. If anything, the finite time made it more precious, more worthy of appreciation and effort. She would have decades with him if she was fortunate. Decades of conversations and companionship, of slowly learning how to be something other than the creature she had been for 3 centuries. Decades of practicing integration, of making conscious choices about who she wanted to be, of building connections beyond just this one mortal man. And when he was gone, she would carry the lessons forward, would continue the work they had started together, would honor his memory by refusing to retreat back into the isolation and despair she had known before. It was not redemption. She was not naive enough to believe that a few weeks of better behavior could erase 3 centuries of darkness. It was not salvation. She was still a vampire, still cursed, still fundamentally apart from the mortal world. But it was something. It was progress, change, growth. It was the possibility of a different future than the one she had resigned herself to. And for now, in this moment, sitting with Marcus in her cathedral of candles and shadows, feeling the warmth of his presence and the hope he had given her, it was enough. 1 year later. The village had come to know Marcus's nightly walks to the old cathedral, though few understood the reason for them. Some thought him mad, obsessed with the ruins of faith. Others whispered that he was cursed, drawn to the unholy place by dark magic. But most simply shrugged and accepted it as one of his eccentricities, the way they accepted that old Thomas talked to his deceased wife or that the baker's daughter could predict rain. No one knew about Vladimira, about the vampire bride who waited in that abandoned place. Marcus kept her existence secret, protecting her from the hunters and monster slayers who would surely come if word of her spread. It was a gift he gave her. Privacy, security, the chance to continue existing without constant threat of destruction. And Vladimira had changed in that year, had transformed in ways that went beyond the physical. She still wore her wedding gown, still bore her crown, still possessed her terrible beauty and supernatural power. But she had learned to use that power differently, to channel it towards something other than destruction and despair. She had begun venturing beyond the cathedral, moving through the night-shrouded world with Marcus as her guide. She walked in forests and stood by rivers, listened to the sounds of nocturnal creatures and felt the wind against her skin. She visited the outskirts of the village, watching from the shadows as mortals lived their lives, relearning the rhythms of human existence she had forgotten. And she had begun to feed with intention rather than rage. She sought out those who preyed on the innocent, bandits and abusers, those who used their power to cause suffering. She became a kind of dark justice, a predator of predators, and while she could not undo the harm such people had caused, she could at least prevent future harm. It was not redemption, but it was purpose, and purpose was something she had lacked for centuries. Marcus encouraged these changes, celebrated them, but he also cautioned her against replacing one rigid role with another. "You are not obligated to be a vigilante," he told her. "You do not have to justify your existence by becoming some kind of dark hero. You are allowed to simply exist, to feed when you must, to find joy and meaning in ways that have nothing to do with grand purpose." "But I want to have purpose," she said. "I want to feel that my existence matters, that I am doing something other than simply perpetuating my own continued being." "Is that so wrong?" "Not wrong," Marcus said. "But be careful not to fall into another trap, another limiting definition of who you must be. You spent centuries as the tragic bride, the isolated monster. Do not now become the guilt-driven avenger, the vampire who seeks redemption through violence. Find balance, variation, the freedom to be different things in different moments." She took his words to heart, and began to explore other ways of spending her endless nights. She read voraciously, devouring the books Marcus brought her, educating herself about the world that had changed so much during her isolation. She learned about science and philosophy, about art and politics, about the countless ways mortals had found to create meaning and beauty in their brief lives. She even attempted to create things herself, writing poetry in the margins of old books, arranging the flowers and candles in her cathedral into patterns that pleased her aesthetic sense, once even trying her hand at painting, though the results were crude and unsatisfying. But the act of creation itself was valuable, a reminder that she was capable of adding to the world rather than only taking from it. And through it all, Marcus was there, constant, patient, encouraging. He had become the anchor of her new existence, the fixed point around which everything else orbited. She had grown to care for him deeply, in ways that went beyond gratitude or intellectual companionship. She loved him, though she rarely spoke the word aloud, unsure if what she felt could truly be called by that name, if a monster could love in the way mortals did. But if it was not love, it was something close, a fierce protectiveness, a deep appreciation, a desire for his happiness and well-being that sometimes surprised her with its intensity. She found herself thinking about him during the long daylight hours when she slept in her crypt, wondering what he was doing, whether he was safe, whether he was happy. She caught herself arranging her hair in ways she thought he might find attractive, choosing her words carefully in conversation to make him smile or laugh. It was strange and wonderful and terrifying, this opening of her long-frozen heart. She was vulnerable in ways she had not been for centuries, exposed to the possibility of loss and grief. If something happened to Marcus, if he was hurt or killed, she did not know how she would bear it. The thought of his mortality haunted her, a constant awareness of time passing, of each night bringing him infinitesimally closer to the death that claimed all mortals. "Do you fear it?" she asked him one night as they stood on the cathedral steps, looking out at the star-filled sky. "Death, I mean. The ending of your existence." Marcus considered the question carefully, as he always did, giving it the weight it deserved. "I fear dying painfully," he said finally. "I fear leaving important things unfinished, relationships unresolved. I fear what my death might do to those I care about." "But death itself? The actual cessation of existence? No, I do not think I fear that. It is too foreign to comprehend, too absolute to generate real terror. It simply is, the inevitable conclusion to this story called life." "I envy you that acceptance," Vladimira said. "I have existed for over 3 centuries and still I cling to this existence, still I fear the true death even though eternal life has been more curse than blessing. I am a coward in ways you are not." "You are not a coward," Marcus said firmly. "You are a being whose every instinct has been reprogrammed towards survival, whose very nature resists death with supernatural intensity. It is not cowardice to fear what your entire being is designed to avoid. It is simply the reality of what you are." "Sometimes I wonder," she said softly, "what would happen if I faced the dawn? If I simply stood here and let the sun rise, let the burning take me, would it hurt? Would it be quick or slow? Would I finally find peace, or would there be nothing at all beyond the ending? Marcus turned to look at her, his expression serious. Is that what you want? Even now, after everything, do you still desire true death? She shook her head. No. Or at least not today, not tonight. But the question remains, lingering at the back of my mind. What am I continuing for? What makes existence worth perpetuating? I have more purpose now than I did a year ago, more connection, more reasons to continue. But is it enough? Will it ever be enough to justify eternity? I do not think eternity can be justified, Marcus said. I think it can only be lived, one night at a time, finding meaning and value in individual moments rather than in some grand cosmic scheme. You are asking the wrong question, Vladimira. It is not about whether your eternal existence is justified, but about whether this particular night, this particular moment, is worth experiencing. And then tomorrow night you ask the same question again. And the next night. And the next. So I should not think about the larger picture? Should not consider the weight of eternity? I think, Marcus said carefully, that the weight of eternity is too heavy for anyone to bear when they think of it all at once. But a single night? That is manageable. That is bearable. And if you string together enough bearable nights, enough moments worth experiencing, eventually you have a life, or an undeath, that feels meaningful, even if you cannot justify it in absolute terms. Vladimira absorbed this, turning the words over in her mind. It was a very mortal perspective, this focus on the immediate and the particular rather than the eternal and the absolute. But perhaps that was exactly what she needed, to learn to think more like a mortal even while inhabiting an immortal form, to break the crushing weight of eternity into manageable pieces. You have given me so much, she said, reaching out to take his hand, intertwining her cold fingers with his warm ones. More than you could possibly know. You have given me hope and purpose and connection. You have reminded me that I am more than the worst thing I have ever done, more than the monster I believed myself to be. I do not know how to repay that debt. There is no debt, Marcus said, squeezing her hand gently. Love does not keep accounts, does not track debts owed and payments made. We give to each other freely, without expectation of return, and we receive with gratitude what is freely given. That is all there is, that is all there needs to be. Love, she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. You said love. He smiled, and there was something tender in it, something that made her cold, still heart ache with phantom longing. Yes, I said love. Because that is what this is it not? Perhaps not the romantic love of stories and songs. I do not know if such love is possible between mortal and immortal, human and vampire. But love nonetheless, in whatever form it takes for beings as strange as we are. Tears spilled down her cheeks, blood red in the starlight, and she made no move to hide them. I have not been loved in over 300 years, she said, her voice breaking. I had forgotten what it felt like, had convinced myself I was unworthy of it, incapable of inspiring it. And now you stand here and say you love me, as though it is simple, as though it is natural, as though a monster could deserve such a gift. You are not a monster, Marcus said, and there was absolute conviction in his voice. Or rather, you are not only a monster. You are Vladimira, complex, contradictory, capable of both darkness and light. And that being, that whole and complicated being, is absolutely worthy of love. I only wish you could see yourself as I see you, could recognize your own value without needing my words to validate it. She pulled him into an embrace, her wings folding around them both, creating a private cocoon of shadow and warmth. She buried her face against his shoulder, letting herself cry freely, letting herself feel the full weight of his words and the gift they represented. She had spent so long isolated, so long convinced of her own monstrosity, that this simple declaration of love felt like a miracle, like the answer to a prayer she had long since stopped speaking. They stood together for a long time, mortal and immortal, human and vampire, two impossible beings sharing an impossible moment. The night stretched around them, vast and dark and full of stars, and for once Vladimira did not feel crushed by its weight. Instead, she felt held, supported, less alone than she had been in centuries. Thank you, she whispered finally, her voice muffled against his coat. Thank you for seeing me, for loving me, for refusing to let me disappear into darkness. Thank you for being brave enough to speak those words that first night, for coming back night after night, for being patient with me as I learned how to be something other than what I was. Thank you for everything. You are welcome, Marcus said, his arms tightening around her. And thank you for letting me in, for being willing to risk vulnerability, for choosing to change even when change was difficult and frightening. Thank you for trusting me enough to show me who you truly are. They stood together under the stars as the night deepened around them, and Vladimira felt something she had not felt in 300 years. She felt at peace. Not the peace of ending or release, not the peace of death or oblivion, but the peace of acceptance, of being fully seen and fully loved, of existing in a moment so perfect that it required no justification beyond itself. She did not know what the future held. She did not know how many more nights she would have with Marcus before mortality claimed him. She did not know if she would find the strength to continue after he was gone, or if she would retreat once more into isolation and despair. But in that moment none of it mattered. In that moment, there was only the warmth of his embrace, the steady beat of his heart against her ear, the knowledge that she was loved and valued and seen. And that, she realized, was enough. Not forever, perhaps, but for tonight. And tomorrow night she would make the choice again, and the next night, and the next, stringing together moments of enough until they formed something that resembled a life worth living. The vampire bride stood in her cathedral with the mortal man who loved her, and for the first time in over 3 centuries she smiled, not with bitterness or irony but with genuine joy. She smiled, and the shadows seemed to lighten around them, and the candles burned brighter, and the abandoned cathedral felt less like a tomb and more like a home. She had been a vampire bride, frozen in eternal grief and rage, until a human spoke words that changed everything, words of compassion, acceptance, and love. And those words had done what silver and stakes and sunlight never could. They had reached the human heart that still beat somewhere within the monster, had reminded her that she was more than the curse that defined her, had given her something precious that made existence bearable and perhaps even beautiful. She would continue night after night, carrying this gift forward into whatever future awaited her. She would honor Marcus's love by refusing to retreat into the darkness she had known, by continuing to grow and change and choose who she wanted to be. And when he was finally gone, claimed by the mortality that was his gift and his curse, she would grieve, but she would not forget, would not let his impact on her fade into meaningless memory. She would remember. She would continue. She would live in whatever way an immortal being could be said to live, and she would do it with the knowledge that once, in an abandoned cathedral at midnight, a mortal man had looked at a monster and seen a being worthy of love. And that would be enough.